App switcher. Close. Activate. Affairs. Heading. Show stats. Part 1. Choice of romance. A high-pitched shriek splits the sweltering summer air. Help. Oh, help, help. Your youngest sister Clara skids to a stop in front of you. Francisco and I were playing in the barn. She sobs. He was showing me spells, and he set the hay on fire, and now. A breath of wind springs up, and the acrid scent of smoke reaches your nostrils. The barn is some ways away from your parents' villa and the vineyards there's that. But it is full of hay for feeding the horses, and hay catches fire so fast it would be so easy for the wooden barn to burn to the ground. The smell of smoke grows stronger the closer you get. By the time you reach the barnyard, your throat and eyes are stinging. You can't see flames from the yard, but as you approach the door, you can feel their heat. Out of the corner of your eye, you see the grooms running towards you. Then you reach the barn door and look inside. Your 7-year-old brother Francisco, face white with terror, is backed up against the barn's far wall, surrounded by leaping flames. What are you going to do? I don't know. There's nothing I can do. Radio button. I rush into the barn to grab Francisco. Radio button. Unchecked. 2 of 6. Checked. I shout to the grooms to bring buckets of water. The best way. Like Francisco, I know some magic. Maybe there's a way to use magic to get him out. Skip ahead to part 2. Choice of intrigues instead. Radio button. Skip ahead to part 3. Tilt. Next. Button. Skip ahead to part. Skip ahead to part. Next. Button. You rip off your shirt, not very modest, but show stat. You rip off your shirt, not very modest, but now is hardly the time for modesty, so get in the water trough and run into the barn. It's like running into an oven. The flames are higher and hotter every second as they gobble down the stacks of hay. You use the wet shirt to beat aside the fire for just long enough to reach Francisco. Then you grab his hand and run, pulling him after you. Flames hiss in your ears and lick at your shoes, and both his clothing and yours is on fire when you stagger into the barnyard. The grooms are there by then. They grab Francisco and you and push you down into the dirt, smothering out the flames. Next. Button. You hear shouting. It seems that Clara succeeded in waking the household, and here they all are, your mother and father and siblings and most of the servants. Your father takes charge of the situation, and under his management, the fire is quickly put out. Your mother cries, alternately praising you for saving Francisco and berating you and Francisco both for stupidity. When the excitement is over, the entire family returns to the house. Next. Button. You walk through the vineyards, through the courtyard, and towards your family's somewhat shabby villa. The villa is old and well constructed, but not as well kept as it might be. Underneath the trellis of bright flowers, for instance, the lintel could really use painting. But the family simply does not have the money to keep up appearances as they should be kept. Your great-grandfather was a conde, and your great-aunt was a condesa, and you have a second cousin or something who is a condesa now. But your father is only an hidalgo, a younger member of a noble house. He has the title Don for courtesy, and he has a fine house in the country, but he doesn't have anything else. Not much money, and no power. Just a house and the family name. And so you don't have anything else, either, as you approach your 16th birthday when you officially come of age. Far away in the capital city of Oro Villa, things are happening. Their life maids and deaf maids study to advance their art, their young men and women enjoy masks and balls and hunts and jousts, their wise and devious advisors lurk at the edges of the monarch's glittering court. Perhaps it is not quite true that nothing ever happens here. Now that something has, are you feeling glad that life here is usually calm and kind of dull? Yes, actually. Radio button. No, not at all. I'd like more excitement on a fairly regular basis. Radio button. Unchecked. 2 of 2. Next. Button. I rather suspect more excitement is waiting in your future. Oh, before we go any further, you are your parents' eldest child, but are you an eldest daughter or an eldest son? Daughter. Radio button. Checked. 1 of. Son. Next. Button. Very well. And what is your given name? Anna. Radio button. Anna. Catalina. Radio button. Isabel. Radio. Maria. Radio button. Violetta. Radio. Maria. Radio button. Violetta. Radio button. Something else. Next. Button. And your family name? Doña Violetta? De Peña. Radio button. De Castillo. Radio button. Unchecked. 2 of 4. De Flores. De Rivera. Radio. Next. Button. And what sorts of things are you good at, Doña Violetta? Like all young people of your class, you've been well trained in the ancient noble houses of Iberia. Tell us about yourself, Doña Violetta. What sort of person are you? What did you spend your spare hours studying when you were younger? I spend every moment of my free time in the library. I am well read in history, literature, mathematics, and I studied Magyari with my father every moment I could spare. I learned how to read the people around me. Studying? I did as little of that as possible. I spent most of my free time daydreaming. Next. Button. Studying? I learned how to read the people around me. Next. Button. Very wise of you. Some would call that manipulation, but manipulation is such a horrid word, isn't it? It's simply easier to get what you want if you are careful than if you make a great fuss. And what would you say is your second most notable quality? Reading my mother's collection of books I studied Magyari with my father, and he says I have mastered the basic spells very well. Shortly we will start working on more complex. It's not exactly a skill, but people comment on how sweet I am and how lovely to be around. How charming. Next. Button. That tells us what you're good at, but you can't be perfect. What would you say is your greatest weakness? I could never be bothered studying my lessons. I can never keep straight all the names of foreign countries and all the kings and queens we've had in Iberia, and I'm terrible at languages and mathematics. I have only the bar scraping of magical talent. I can handle the I could never be bothered studying my next button. But that's not really important, is it? As you are about to enter the house, a bright purple butterfly flits right across your path. Red and blue and yellow ones are common, but purple ones are rare. They bring good luck, so the saying goes. And since it crossed your path, it can only be good luck for you. The butterfly will go and grant you a wish if you wish quickly, so what are you wishing for? A windfall. Enough money to go to court and enjoy the season. Radio button. The chance to do something splendid, something that will change the world. Radio button. An adventure. Anything to enliven dull life in the country. Maybe one. True love. Isn't that? Next button. I hope the butterfly grants your wish. Next chapter button. The next few days meander. Close interstitial ad. Close interstitial ad button. Finally, you're chattering. Fine. The next few days meander past. Nothing of note occurs, except for the arrival of your Uncle Pedro and Aunt LaWonder for your coming-of-age ball. Your uncle is in fact financing the ball with money gained from a recent successful campaign abroad, or you wouldn't be having one at all. Your parents could certainly never afford it. Finally, your birthday arrives. Downstairs, your mother and father await the guests, talking with your aunt and uncle. Up in your pleasant, but plainly furnished bedroom, your 14-year-old sister Magdalena helps you dress for the party. Chattering without a pause for breath, Magdalena finishes tying all your laces. There, she says. Now you can look. You turn to look at yourself in the glass, a very fine mirror indeed, one of the few remnants of your family's former glory. You look splendid, Magdalena declares. And indeed, you are quite pleased with what you see reflected. The rich color of your gown complements your... Would you like golden, radio? Would you like to specify the color of your hair? Golden, brown, radio, black, radio, auburn, radio button, no preference, radio button, unchecked, 5 of 5. Next, button. And your eyes? Low, radio, green, gray, hazel, radio button, unchecked, 4 of 7. Brown, radio button, black, radio button, unchecked, 6. No prep, next, button. You look at yourself in the mirror, admiring your new gown. It is made of silk, in a vibrant green shade that allows your thick auburn hair to be shown to best advantage, and edged with ribbon and lace that perfectly set off your black eyes. Your mother has loaned you her wedding jewels, and they wink around your throat and in your hair. You feel like you have suddenly changed into someone completely different. Magdalena claps her hands in delight. Come on, Violetta, I can hear guests arriving. It's time to go downstairs. Next, button. You stand with your mother and father, receiving guests and graciously accepting their best wishes. The guests are mostly families from nearby states, plus a few friends of your parents from farther away. Everyone looks most splendid, dressed in formal coats and beautiful gowns in a rainbow of colors. Everyone has a smile for you. Some of the adults look at you appraisingly, only to be expected as you are now considered to be of marriageable age, and many of the youngsters of your age try to flirt. You flirt back, but only a little, since your mother and Aunt LaWonder are standing nearby. Oh, by the way, are you flirting with the young men or the young women? The young women. Next, button. There are many handsome young men to flirt with. You stand in the receiving line for what seems to be hours. Behind you, the guests circulate and talk, and snippets of gossip drift to your ears. Did you hear about Don Alonso's youngest? Foolish girl, she turned down a most advantageous proposal last year and it was her 3rd season at court. What does she think to do now? She can't possibly offer. It is the way of things. One either courts or is courted. A youngster of 16 or so is courted, generally by a well-established adult of 25 or 30. Among the nobility, an eldest child is likely to have his or her own household, and seek to bring a husband or wife into it. Younger children are courted by others. There are exceptions, of course. Wealthy parents may be able to provide all their children with sufficient inheritance to set up households, and poverty-stricken families like yours cannot even do it for their eldest. I heard that she turned down that proposal because she had, foolish indeed, don't you Beatrice? I heard that Beatrice's sister Eugenia is having a love affair with Don Carlos of Vargas. With Don Carlos? But he is a light. That, too, is the way of the world. There are death-made of course, it is only the way of things if the king. I heard their majesties have lost another unborn child. You hear another thread of gossip start. How dreadful. It is dreadful. I heard that the king has commanded young Thomas to raise to be brought to court. Aunt LaWonder clears her throat and changes the subject, reminding the speaker that there are youngsters listening. At last, your duties in the receiving line end. Now what? I shall go and dance. Radio button, checked, 1 of 3. I see a group gossiping in the corner. I shall go and see if I can hear more. There is another group who appear to be discussing magic and other studies. Next, button. You have taken only the first step when your uncle's voice boomed out, calling for everyone's attention. I wish to propose a toast, he says, in honor of my niece's birthday. There is a smattering of applause. Goblets are raised. And I wish to make an announcement. Uncle Pedro continues. He pauses to be sure he has the attention of the entire room, and then says, I have been so fortunate as to receive the favor of our most gracious king. In recognition of my service abroad, he has awarded me with a suite of rooms in the palace, and given me permission to bring my niece Violetta to court when the season starts in the autumn. Violetta, you shall have a proper season after all. Next, button. I can manage a season's worth of gowns, he adds the following morning over breakfast, when it is just family again. Not more than that. You won't be able to return next year if you don't manage to find a spouse this year. But 4 months ought to be enough. I am very grateful to you, uncle, you say. Only doing my best for the family, he replies, somewhat pompously. And giving you the opportunity to do your best, in turn. Depending on whose eye you catch, you may be able to secure me a spot of influence commensurate with our family's honor, if not its recent fortune. Even if you can't do that, says your father, a match with a suitor of means can improve our family's fortunes. And secure your own comfort, says your mother. And then after you are married, you can chaperone me when it is my turn to be presented at court, says Magdalena. What about you? What are you hoping to get out of this? Security. I want to make a good marriage with someone wealthy, so I don't have to worry about money any longer. Radio button, checked, 1 of 6. Fun. True love, fun. I'll never have any here in the country. This is my only chance. The chance to influence and adventure. I don't want to go, actually. Radio button, next, button. Fairly said. In any case, you are off to the capital with your uncle and aunt as soon as your clothing can be made. Next chapter, button. From that point on, time seems to move faster than it ever has before. 2 months are scarcely enough time to put together the wardrobe you will require as a young lady of the court: gowns, shoes, scarves, hose and garters, bejeweled trinkets. Almost before you know it, the day of your departure is at hand, and you find yourself jolting over the road with Uncle Pedro, Aunt Leonor, and Magdalena. For Magdalena is accompanying you. She is too young to be presented at court, of course, but your mother and Aunt Leonor thought it would be well for you to have a companion, and well for Magdalena to get an idea of how the court functions. You wouldn't have thought it would be much fun to be dragged along to the capital, and once there, spend most of the time under Aunt Leonor's supervision and none at all enjoying court functions, but Magdalena seems delighted. She chatters excitedly the whole journey, hardly even stopping for breath. So how are you feeling about having her along? Pleased. I will not know anyone at court. After all, it will be good to have someone I can talk to. Radio button. Annoyed. I have plans, damn it, and I worry that Magdalena's presence will make them harder to execute. Radio button. Indifferent. Radio button. Unchecked. Next button. So true. Her childish babbling will just get in the way. Still, nothing to be done about it. At any rate, the 4 of you arrive at the capital before you have gone completely deaf from Magdalena's chatter, swallow some supper, and fall into bed. Next button. Early in the morning of your first day at court, your aunt takes you to their majesties' private rooms, where all the ladies and gentlemen in waiting are assembled. A servant opens the door at your aunt's knock, and the first thing you see is a tall, middle-aged man addressing an assembly of ladies and gentlemen in waiting. He turns and regards you and Aunt Leonor with a raised eyebrow. Aunt Leonor curtsies. Don Benedicto, she says, may I present my niece, Violetta de Castillo? Oh, Don Benedicto says. Yes, of course. Thank you, Doña Leonor. Don Benedicto looks at you in a manner more appraising than friendly. We are rehearsing a mask to be performed before the court this evening. It is, oh, but Don Benedicto, says one young woman. Doña Teresa. Next button. That proves to be an understatement. You soon discover that the role assigned to you consists of waiting atop a tower while battle rages. Still, despite the small and boring nature of your part, you have to admit that the mask being rehearsed is very impressive indeed. A mask is an after-dinner entertainment in which ladies and gentlemen disguise their identities and play assigned roles. In this case, the story is of a mage, Perseverance, who uses his magic to dispatch many evil creatures. You think it is likely that the young woman who used to be playing Virtue considered it a significant advancement to take a part of devotion. You watch the rehearsal from atop your tower, admiring the construction of the tower and the care that has been put into the costumes. If this is an everyday entertainment, your time at court will be dazzling indeed. Next button. At last Perseverance succeeds in reaching you, and you rehearse the rescue. Perseverance, as you climb down from the tower, your gown catches. You quickly pull it free, thankful it did not tear. We will have to be careful not to do that tonight, you say to Perseverance, trying to make conversation. Oh, it will not be we tonight, he says. You look at him in confusion. The king is taking the part of Perseverance tonight, Don Benedicto. I must not. You can't imagine. The young man playing Perseverance explains. The king will come in disguise to play the part of Perseverance. We are all. You try to make sense of this. So we are to it. Exactly. This is unusual behavior, to say, but the king must know his courtiers recognize him. You are having a jest with me because I am new to court, are you not? Radio button, unchecked, 2 of 3. Very well. Next button. Certainly not, Don Benedicto says sharply. Embarrassed, you turn back to the tower. It's all right, Perseverance says, low. We've all said something like that from time to time. It is a somewhat ridiculous game we all play. Best not to say that out loud, though. He smiles. I ought to have introduced myself before. Gabriel de Mendoza, at your service. Don Benedicto curtly orders the rehearsal to resume, and it does. You return to your room with time to change before the evening meal. You look at your wardrobe, and consider the choices before you. You have been assigned a part that has you standing passively while others in the court draw attention to themselves. Is that good enough for you, or are you going to do something different? I shall play the role as I was instructed, and gain approval by acting properly. Check. I shall play the... Once the... Next button. Certainly the safest choice. You dress in a becoming, but modest, outfit, and walk down to the Great Hall with your uncle and aunt. Next button. You sit at a table in the Great Hall with the other young ladies and gentlemen in waiting, most of whose names you don't yet know, and enjoy a most delicious meal. Between courses, you look around. At the high table sit King Augustine and his consort, Inez. The queen consort is a life maid, from the formidable family. At the king's other side sits Luis de Vega, foremost advisor of the court. At the queen consort's other side sits Princess Juanita, the only living child of the king and his queen consort. But you notice that the eyes of both the king and the queen consort go off into a lower table, where sits a small boy whose resemblance to the king is unmistakable. This must be Thomas de Reyes, whom you have learned is the king's illegitimate life-made child. His illegitimacy makes it difficult. The king sends a dish down to Thomas de Reyes' table, and the queen consort's lips tighten a little. Next button. At last, the final course is cleared, and it is time to change for the performance. As you leave the Great Hall with the other young ladies and gentlemen in waiting, you see de Vega making a big production of seeking the king's attention. The king rises. The queen consort's smile seems somewhat fixed. You don your mask and take your place at the top of the tower, standing with your hands folded in front of you and your eyes cast modestly downward. Next button. Perseverance and his companions enter. Perseverance is so obviously the king, you cannot see how anyone could ever pretend to be fooled. The king, he switches to magic to fight greed and wrath, using the one none of his opponents even touch him with weapons or magic. At last, the king vanquishes the final obstacle, pride, and looks up at you. You stretch out your hand beseechingly, as you have been instructed. When de Mendoza was playing this part, he only handed you down from the tower. But the king surprises you by reaching up, grasping you under the arms, and swinging you down beside him. And then he whips off his mask in a grand gesture. Do you pretend to be surprised? Yes, radio button, checked. 1 of 2. No, radio button, unchecked. Next, button. From the other players in the mask, and from everywhere else in the court, you hear impressively realistic gasps of surprise. But you only smile at the king. I knew it could only be you, your majesty. He frowns. You knew me? Of course, you say. So handsome and so bold it couldn't. The irritation smooths from his face mostly. You pay a pretty compliment. He reaches out and pulls off your mask. But yours is a face unknown. What is your Violeta de Castillo, your majesty, you say, and make a deep curtsy. Ah yes, of course. Don Pedro is next, button. You have a most delightful time the rest of the evening. There are other performances, and in between, you make the acquaintance of many different people. Your aunt comes to you, leading a plump, middle-aged man with a red face and expensive clothes. Violeta, she says, Don Carlos Torres most particularly desired to make your acquaintance. I am enchanted, Torres says to you. The rest of the night passes in a blur. You ride the wave of exhilaration back to your room and tumble into sleep. Next chapter, button. A few days later, you attend a lavish banquet in honor of the newly arrived ambassador from Sara. Your aunt inspects your attire narrowly, and pulls your collar up a little higher. It is very important that you be dressed respectably at an important function such as this. The honor of House de Castillo is at stake. You follow her and your uncle down the stairs, and join the crowd milling about the great hall, sipping wine and waiting for the king and queen consort to enter with the ambassador. You stand for a moment in the doorway, watching the room. Good evening, Doña Violeta, a voice says at your elbow. You turn to see Carlos Torres. He is again dressed in clothing that is obviously expensive, but not flattering. My niece would be delighted to have you as an escort, Aunt Lavender says meaningfully from your other side. You seem to have no other choice but to take Don Carlos's arm. He leads you in a promenade about the room. What do you do? Torres is both wealthy and respectable, clearly well established, and of an age to be seeking a spouse. I could do a lot worse. I encourage his attentions. Radio button, checked, 1 of 3. Torres is not what I had in mind. Ugh. There is nothing I want less than the courtship of this sweaty old person. Next, button. It is very kind of you to take such an interest in me, you say. Oh, not at all, Torres. I don't know anything about you. Won't you tell me a little about yourself? Torres talk. Next, button. After a while, Torres asks if you would like a glass of wine. You smile. Yes, thank you. He trundles off to secure it. You turn and find yourself face to face with Don Gabriel de Mendoza, who gives you a dazzling smile. Hello, yes, please. Radio button, check. Who gives you a dazzling smile? Hello, Doña Violeta. What a pleasure to see you again. He is holding 2 goblets of wine, and extends one. Yes, no, next, button. De Mendoza smiles at you. I saw you with Torres. I can't imagine you like having someone so old and boring court you. I know it is how things are. Really? You say. Yes, really. I am not married. Did you not receive an offer when you were my age? I did. You consider this? Not before you can decide. Torres reaches you just as the herald announces the entry of their majesties and the ambassador. He escorts you to a table and sits beside you. Aunt Leonor beams at you from across the table. Next, button. You turn and help yourself to the fruit, heart fluttering. When you look around, it is not so uncommon for a young lady or gentleman recently come to court to receive the attention of his majesty, but still it is something. The banquet goes until very late. You sleep in the next morning, and the whole family is content to let you recover, well aware of how late you returned the night before. Next, button. The whole family, that is, except for Magdalena, who bursts into your bedchamber. Get up, Violeta, it's so exciting. The king himself has sent you a bouquet of flowers and an invitation to join him at the tourney tomorrow. The king, oh, and de Mendoza, how do you feel about this? Right now, I just want Magdalena to go away. Radio button, checked. 1 of. The king is sending me flowers? It's like a fairy tale. Radio button, unchecked. Right now, I just want The king, excellent, my plans are developing nicely. Radio button, de Mendoza said, the king is sending, excellent. How will I ever decide? Next, button. Completely understandable. You chase Magdalena, show stats, completely understandable. You chase Magdalena out of your room and take several minutes to compose yourself. After dressing for the day, you leave your bedchamber to examine the tokens yourself. Your Aunt Leonor greets you with a smile as you enter the sitting room. Ah, Violeta, how good to see you this morning. And after such a successful time at the banquet, Carlos Torres has sent you a very nice scarf imported silk, no less, and an invitation to tea. I do hope you will accept. Ah, I had not heard of that token. Magdalena mentioned only the invitation from His Majesty. Leonor makes a face and waves her hand dismiss. If you want my advice, she says. How do you respond? Gratefully. Radio button. Checked. 1 of 3. Checked. Sarcastically. Thoughtfully. Next. Button. Next. Examine the gifts and invitations personally. Radio. Ask my uncle for advice. Examine. Accept Torres. Accept the Mendoza's. Accept the king's invitation and attend the. Accept Torres's invitation and go to tea. Radio button. Unchecked. Examine the. Next. Button. You instruct one of the servants to send a message to Carlos Torres accepting his invitation to tea. Shortly later, your uncle Pedro approaches you, his hands working in front of him. My dear Violeta, I want to make sure you have thought through your decision carefully enough. Torres is a fine suitor. He has made a fortune in trade, and being his spouse will open many doors. But I want to be certain that you are not selling yourself short. Do you heed your uncle's advice and accept the king's invitation instead? Yes, I go to the tourney with the king instead. Radio but no, I accept Torres's invitation despite my uncle. Check. Next. Button. You accept Carlos Torres's invitation to tea. The following day, you dress in fine but not overly fancy clothes and travel across town to Torres's home, accompanied by your Aunt Leonor as a chaperone. As you approach Torres's mansion, you realize that he is even wealthier than you had imagined. Even located near the heart of Oro Villa, his home is sharply appointed servants show you into a plush sitting room, decorated with mahogany furniture and gorgeous rugs imported at impossible expense from far-off lands. As soon as you enter, a servant carries in a solid gold tea service. Torres stands to greet you, a smile on his face. Tea is pleasant, but no more than that. As before, you feel no connection with Torres. He makes his interest transparent, complimenting you on your appearance, your conversation, and there must be a better option than a dried-up old man like Carlos Torres. I need to demonstrate to him that I am not interested in his courtship. Radio button, checked, 1 of 3. He might do, but I want to make sure he has some passion. Things are going exactly according to plan. He might do, but I want to make sure he has some passion. I want to see how he reacts to a more direct approach. Radio button, unchecked, 2. Things, next, button. Your aunt sits in the parlor with you, not participating in the conversation but making certain that no improprieties take place. But after a few hours, she excuses herself briefly, and you seize the opportunity. Come, Carlos, surely you will take me on a walk through your lovely gardens. He looks startled. Of course, it would be my pleasure, but we should wait for your aunt first. Oh, one of your servants can bring her after us in a moment. Let's go now. Torres pauses, clearly thinking quickly and trying to decide the best response. Finally, he says, if you think that will not create trouble, and offers you his arm. Next, button. As you expected, the gardens are beautiful, with meticulously kept beds of the finest flowers. And yet your walk is something of a disappointment. Even away from your chaperone, Torres does not make the slightest advance. I have found out what I wanted to know. Radio button, checked, 1 of 2. If he will not, I will. I find out. Next, button. Your aunt quickly catches up to you, a disapproving look on her face. She seems relieved as she looks both of you over and concludes that nothing particularly untoward can have happened. The 3 of you finish a pleasant if somewhat boring promenade through the gardens before finally circling back to the mansion. At least if you marry Torres, you will have plenty of money with which to seek diversion just as well, because he will not provide you with any. At the end of the afternoon, you take your leave, and he affectionately yet formally makes his goodbyes. As your carriage takes you back to your uncle's rooms at the palace, and Leonor scolds you fiercely for your behavior, what would people think? Do you want to develop a reputation? If you are thought to be badly behaved, no respectable suitor will want you, and then where will House de Castillo be? But after you apologize and promise to be better behaved in the future, she relents. Still, things are proceeding nicely. He said that he hoped to call upon your uncle soon. With just a little more effort, and quite a bit more appropriate behavior, I should hope, I think you can expect a proposal. Next chapter, button. Most of the events you attend as part of the season are purely social events, often with a form of entertainment included. Every so often, however, a more substantial event occurs at court. These are the sorts of events that you should attend so that you can see and be seen, but at which the king and his advisors, most notably Luis de Vega, perform the actual business of ruling Iberia. On a hot summer day, the king's court will meet to discuss some delicate matters with the recently arrived ambassador of the neighboring country Sara. But before you begin, de Mendoza waits for you in the parlor. Ah, Doña Violeta, I am so glad to see you, he begins. While his greeting is warm, he seems distracted. I wish I had time for a purely social call today, but I need to speak to you about the meeting of the king's court. It is an interesting question. How well do you— Wait, you mean this ambassador is here for a specific reason? I know the basics, but not much more than— I am well informed. You cannot truly master the social aspects of the court without understanding the political context. Next, button. It's true, the most important part of an ambassador's visit is really the exotic and pretty clothing they wear, and the social function. As you think about it, though, you remember some advice of your uncle at dinner last night. Stay away from politics in your conversations, he said. You do not want to either offend people who have ties to Sara or offend the nobles who rule the south of Iberia. Next, button. Of course, Don Gabriel, you can count on my support. Radio button, checked, 1 of 4. I do not know. Politics, I do not see things this, I do not know. Politics can be so confusing. Radio button, unchecked, 3 of 4. Next, button. Next. I do not understand the situation well enough to have a position. It is not my place to have a position on great matters of state. Radio button, unchecked, 2 of 6. How dare the border lords have caused the important thing. Next, button. Next. Next, button. Let the king, the ministers of state, and the great nobles argue about political matters. Your input would be neither desired nor useful. Much better to concentrate on looking your best and appearing appropriate and respectful. Next, button. When you arrive at the grand audience chamber where the king will receive the ambassador and discuss matters, a large number of courtiers and interested parties have gathered. The room is filled with the buzz of quiet conversation. Certain people, including the king's advisor Luis de Vega, actively work the room, although you cannot tell at a glance whether they seek to measure or to influence opinion. Others, what do you plan on doing while waiting for the arrival of His Majesty the King? Just watch. I am here to see and be seen. Radio button. Floored with Carlos Torres. Radio button. Floored with Gabriel de Mendoza. Radio. Determine the positions of the various factions. Radio button. Next button. Floored with Gabriel. Floored with Gabriel. Floored with Carlos. Floored with Carlos. Just watch. I am here to see. Just. Next button. It is certainly a good opportunity for that. Everyone who is anyone is at the court, and dressed up in their very finest. You make a nice entrance and then carefully take up a position on the side of the room highly visible but outside of the areas where courtiers heatedly discuss politics. Next button. After the courtiers have had a couple of hours to discuss matters and politic, a chamberlain slams the butt of a ceremonial mace into the ground 3 times. My lords, ladies, and gentles, His Majesty the King. The room falls silent as the courtiers respectfully drop to their knees in homage to the king. The king gestures for them to rise. We appreciate your attendance upon us in this difficult hour. Any who would wish to petition the crown may do so. You recognize the words as following the traditional protocols. Some of the hidalgos in the room stepped forward and kneel again, waiting to be recognized. The king will not be bound by the sentiments of the court, but he will surely. Next button. As the speechifying draws to a close, the king again resorts to a traditional formula. We thank you for the advice you have offered us. Now, we should hear the words of the representative of our cousin. He gestures to the chamberlain, who in turn signals to the guards and announces as the doors swing open, His Excellency Ambassador and Minister Plenipotentiary of Sara. The ambassador sweeps in, dressed formally in the slightly exotic but still recognizable styles of Sara. After the appropriate polite exchanges conclude, the ambassador presents his arguments. He complains bitterly about the depredations of the bandits, while the king nods in acknowledgement of the ambassador's statement. He listens to Vega for a moment as his advisor whispers in his ear. Finally, for the first time on this day, the king gives a serious speech describing his position. Next button. We understand the arguments on all sides. First, let us address Sara. Sara is recent. Don Gabriel de Mendoza, the border lords, and the young firebrands of the court whisper amongst themselves in response to the king's statement. They seem satisfied. The king continues. As for the border lords flinch as the king announces this heavy punishment. To lose land and likely the best of their lands is one of the greatest fears of any noble family. But while they are angry and upset, the court as a whole accepts the king's statement with equanimity. The allies of the border lords, including the Duquesa de Aguilar and Don Gabriel de Mendoza, are some. Next button. The king finishes his speech. With the royal position clear, the socially appropriate thing to do would simply be to fall in line behind the king. Nonetheless, there is still an opportunity to make one last speech to try to change His Majesty's mind. Do you speak up to try to influence the king? Yes, yes, to persuade His Majesty. Yes, to persuade His Majesty to be harsher towards Sara. Radio button. Yes, to persuade His Majesty to be more conciliatory towards. Yes, to persuade His Majesty to punish. Yes, to persuade His Majesty to treat the border lords better. Radio button. Unchecked. 4 of 5. No. Radio button. Unchecked. 5 of 5. Next. But. No. Radio button. Next. Button. Why not? I do not care enough. Radio button. I do not want to irritate the king. Radio button. Unchecked. 3. It would be too exposed. I would make too many enemies. Radio button. I am happy with the current outcome. Radio. Next. Button. A wise concern. Next. Button. After all of the speeches finish, the king makes a final, formulaic speech and the court comes to a close. The final effects of the king's decision take some time to fully unfold. The king orders limited retribution on Sara. He seizes a few highly disputed tracts of land, but he is careful to prevent atrocities or random pillaging. The king punishes the border lords with a firm but measured hand. The border lords grumble, but none of them are willing to rebel openly, and what other option do they have? The king and his close allies benefit greatly from the punishment while no one border lord loses too much. In aggregate the forfeitures are quite substantial. Next chapter. Button. The glittering weeks of the season slide past, each more exciting than the last. You see a great deal of Torres, of de Mendoza, and of the king. On the day of the grand ball, perhaps the most important event of any season, you spend hours in front of the glass. You dress in a gown of silvery silk, and knots around your throat, a scarf exactly the color of your eyes. You look critically at your reflection and are pleased with the effect. Magdalena brushes your hair for you and arranges it becomingly. As a final touch, you pin a single rose to your gown, where it is almost hidden by the folds of the scarf. By old tradition, the grand ball marks the occasion when young women such as yourself may give a rose to that suitor whom she prefers above all other suitors. Your aunt says she expects you to behave properly and give it to Torres. Magdalena sighs with ecstasy. Your aunt says she expects you to behave properly and give it to Torres. And your uncle smiles at you approvingly. Best to leave the posy where it is, so the king will know you are still available, should he wish it. You head down to the ball. Next. Button. You thought the season's smaller parties were splendid, but they fade into unimportance as soon as you enter the great hall. Ropes of sweet-smelling white flowers hang from every structure capable of supporting them. Enough torches are. Most of the other nobles welcome your presence, although a handful turn up their noses. Your reputation for certain indiscretions has turned the more fastidious people against you. I'd like to see you smile, he says, leaning over you. I consider it my honor to ensure your happiness. You look up into his kind face. Do you give him the rose? Yes, radio. Do you? I'd like to see you smile. Most of the other nobles welcome your presence, although a handful turn up their noses. Your reputation for certain indiscretions has turned the more fastidious people against you. Still, while people may whisper stories about you, you have not truly disgraced yourself. Torres brings you a cup of wine at once, and guides you to a seat. You look up into his kind face. Do you? Yes, radio button, checked. No, next, button. Next. He is by far the most graceful person you have ever danced with. He moves easily and is light on his feet, and his eyes sparkle as though he is genuinely enjoying himself. We have never, he murmurs into your ear, danced with so lovely a lady. Your Majesty is too kind, you say. The dance comes to an end, and the king inclines his head to in thanks. Later that night, after the ball has been over for some time, after your uncle and aunt have retired and you are telling Magdalena all about your evening's adventures, a tap comes on your door. It is a servant, eyes deferentially cast down. His Majesty bids you to attend him if you are not too tired. There is only one thing the king can mean. But the invitation did say if you are not too tired. There is a way out, if you wish to take it. Do you go? Yes, radio button, checked. No, next, button. Are you intending to sleep with him, or are you going to use this visit to inflame his desire for you? I will give myself to the king, if that is what he desires. I will go and flirt, but I will not give. Next, button. I will give myself to the king, if that is what he... Next, button. Next. Will you allow what he so obviously desires? Yeah, no, next, button. You allow the kiss, and then you return it. The king stands, takes both of your hands, and draws you into his bedroom. The night that follows surpasses even your wildest dreams. In the morning, the servant takes you back to your room. Perhaps unfortunately, your aunt has risen early, and so before an hour has passed, all three of your family members know where you spent the night. Before the day has passed, the news has whispered its way all through the court. Next chapter, button. Several days after the ball, your sister Magdalena comes into your bedchamber. She makes a face. Carlos Torres has called on Uncle Pedro and Aunt Leonor. He surely wishes to propose to you. I do not envy you, Violetta, pursued by a withered old man like that. I hope you find some way out of such a bitter marriage. Our uncle and aunt said they want to speak with you in the study. As you enter the study, your aunt looks well satisfied, while your uncle has a pensive expression. Aunt Leonor begins speaking. I have very good news for you, Violetta. Carlos Torres is waiting in the sitting room for you. He has asked for our permission to ask for your hand in marriage. We have, of course, consented. You should be very pleased with yourself. All you need to do is to accept his offer, and your uncle cuts in. It is well that you have received a proposal from a wealthy and influential man. And yet, I would caution you to not be too swift to accept. He holds up his hand as Aunt Leonor makes an indignant sound. From both what I saw at the ball and what I have heard from others, His Majesty the King thinks of nothing else but you. You have done. Next, button. Aunt Leonor frowns disapprovingly. It is all well and good that His Majesty recognizes Violetta's virtues, but she must think there is truth in what your aunt says. And yet your uncle pauses, a shrewd look on his face. Why settle for a brass ring when gold is within reach? The word around the court is that the Queen Consort is out of favor with His Majesty. Madness, cries Aunt Leonor as she wrings her hands. You have a fine opportunity. Do not. Your aunt and uncle continue to debate the issue for a while longer, but soon the time has come for you to face Torres. Receive. Next. Text field. Next. Button. Torres stands as next. Button. Oh, Carlos, I dreamed of this day. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. You clutch his hand in your own, leaning in to kiss him quickly. You startle Torres with your enthusiasm, but he smiles. This could have been a marriage of convenience, but it hardens me that it will be more than that. Next. Button. Frantic planning consumes the next several weeks. You have a wedding to prepare for, and not just any wedding, but an enormous celebration, to which anyone with even a bit of status and polite. You spend several pleasant afternoons with Don Carlos, but he remains very busy, preoccupied with matters of business. That is how your marriage will be as well, you suppose. Pleasant, but always with distractions to pull him away from you. And that is when the note arrives. A courier, with a plain grey woolen cloak over his livery, insists on delivering the note to your hand only. You cannot help noticing the royal colors on the livery that flashes at his sleeve as he proffers the note. The note reads, I was pleased to hear of your recent good fortune, Violetta, and yet I still long to see you. After all, the rules are different for me. Would you be? It is signed simply Augustine, without a seal, and yet it must be from the king. How do you respond? Oh, the king actually cares. I break my engagement with Torres, radio button. I go through with my marriage to Torres, but I also meet the king for... I will be respectably, next, button. You ask the courier to assure his principal that you will be there and prepare to live. Do you tell Torres about your budding relationship with the king? Of course not. It can only cause trouble, radio button. Checked, 1 of 2. Of course, next, button. Why would you invite a row with your betrothed? Better to simply, or so you think at the time. You have begun to pursue an affair with His Majesty, have you? I would never betray you. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? Radio button. You have begun to pursue an affair with His Majesty, have you not? I would never betray you like that. How dare you accuse me of such a... I am so... Next, button. Torres laughs, a cold and bitter sound. You have the temerity to lie to me as well and to feign shock. How do you react? I just look at my feet. His word, I stay silent. Best to just weather his tirade. Radio button. No, how dare you? You go. Next, button. A long and cold silence hangs between you. Finally, Torres continues, coldly but speaking rapidly. Very well. I never thought that I would be a procurer, but if I am to be married to a prostitute, then by the powers of death and life, how do you respond? Torres has gone too far. I break the engagement regardless of the consequences. Radio button. My tears are my only answer. Radio button. I hang my head. Torres has gone too... Next, button. You curse at Torres. You are the slimiest creature I have ever... You storm out, not waiting to hear his response. The broken engagement creates something of a scandal. Torres is vague about... Your uncle emphasizes that the king's interest is worth far more than Torres's, but that now you must bring that to fruition. Next chapter, button. Before long, everyone at court knows you are the king's new favorite. You are at his side during every hunt, he wears your favor during every joust, he partners you at every dance and mask. You have a fine suite of rooms for your own use at the palace, and the king spends more nights there with you than he does with the queen consort. The king gives your mother the gift of some traders' lands, and the revenue from these goes far to alleviate your family's constant financial worries. As for you, the king gives you jewels, gorgeous clothes, and what use you make of your new position. Accumulate as much wealth as possible. Radio button.